The Nazis couldn't understand how 2,400 people escaped in a single night across the river. Captain Søren Hansen, October 1st, 1943, 11:47 p.m. Port of Gilleleje, Denmark. Obersturmbannführer Heinrich Müller stands on the pier, binoculars pressed to his eyes, watching the Øresund Strait. On both sides, German patrols stretch along the coast every 500 meters. Soldiers with searchlights, fast motorboats, dogs trained to detect human presence. It is a perfect net. 3 hours earlier, at 8:43 p.m., the order had arrived from Berlin. Arrest every Danish Jew immediately. The operation, codenamed Judenrein Denmark, Denmark free of Jews, was to be completed within 48 hours. The Nazis had compiled meticulous lists. 7,800 Jews lived in Denmark. By midnight on October 2nd, all of them were to be on trains headed for concentration camps. Müller smiled with confidence. Denmark was small, compact, no mountains to hide in. The crossing to neutral Sweden was barely 4 kilometers, at its narrowest point. But it was under constant surveillance. No one could possibly get across without being detected. What Müller did not know, what he would discover with growing horror over the next 72 hours, was that at that exact moment, while he stared into the black water, 214 people were already crossing the strait in a silent flotilla of fishing boats. By dawn on October 2nd, another 831 would be across. By the end of the weekend, 2,400 Danish Jews would be safe in Sweden. And all of it coordinated by one man. Captain Søren Hansen, a 52-year-old cod fisherman who turned his fishing fleet into the most effective rescue navy of the entire Second World War. This is the story of how a Danish fisherman organized the boldest mass exodus right under Nazi noses. How intimate knowledge of the sea defeated German military surveillance. And how 2,400 people vanished in a single night, leaving the Nazis searching for ghosts in a country that had emptied itself while they watched. The sea, before the occupation. Denmark in 1940 was maritime to its core. The Øresund Strait, 4 to 28 kilometers wide, separating Denmark from Sweden, was not a barrier. It was a highway. For centuries, Danish fishermen had navigated those waters with a familiarity so deep, it bordered on instinct. Søren Hansen was born on March 12, 1891, in Gilleleje, a fishing town 50 kilometers north of Copenhagen. His father had been a fisherman. His grandfather had been a fisherman. His great-grandfather had drowned in the storm of 1847 while fishing cod in the same strait Søren would sail for 40 years. By 1940, Søren captained the Johanna Marie, a 15-meter fishing boat he had bought in 1928 with the savings of his entire life. The boat was more his home than any house on land. He knew every plank, every rope, every engine compartment, how it behaved in different seas under different winds. But more important than the boat, Søren knew the strait. He knew currents that shifted with the tide. He knew sandbanks that appeared under a full moon. He knew routes that avoided deep water where engines echoed too loudly. He carried 47 years of secrets. Secrets the Øresund revealed only to men who spent their whole lives on its surface. In 1940, that knowledge was ordinary. In 1943, it would become extraordinary. The German occupation of Denmark on April 9, 1940, was unlike other Nazi conquests. There was no significant military resistance. The Danish government, recognizing the futility of armed opposition, negotiated a surrender that preserved considerable internal autonomy. Denmark became the Nazis' model protectorate. Proof, so Berlin claimed, that Aryan peoples could collaborate peacefully with the Third Reich. For Denmark's 7,800 Jews, that autonomy meant temporary survival. Unlike Poland, the Netherlands, or France, where anti-Jewish laws were imposed immediately, Denmark resisted. King Christian X famously declared that if Jews were forced to wear yellow stars, then he would wear one too. It was symbolic, but powerful. Denmark would not hand over its citizens. For 3 years, the uneasy arrangement held. The Nazis tolerated Danish autonomy as long as Denmark delivered valuable agricultural goods. Jews lived in constant fear, but without active persecution. Søren Hansen, a fisherman with no particular interest in politics, watched everything with the practical anxiety of a man who sees a storm forming. He had Jewish friends in Gilleleje, Goldstein the shopkeeper, Dr. Levy, families who had lived there for generations. They were as Danish as he was. In late-night harbor conversations, fishermen debated what they would do if the Nazis eventually came for the Jews. Some argued pragmatism, not our problem. Others argued morality. They're our neighbors. Søren didn't argue. He simply said, if they come, we'll have to do something. It wasn't heroic. It was practical. The voice of a man used to solving problems with the tools he had. The eventual problem would be simple: people needing to cross the strait. The tool was equally simple: boats that crossed the strait every day. The storm arrived on September 28, 1943. The warning. On September 28th, Georg Ferdinand Duckwitz, a German diplomat working in Copenhagen, did something extraordinary. He betrayed his own government to save lives. Duckwitz had learned that on October 1st, the SS would carry out mass raids to arrest every Danish Jew. Horrified, he secretly contacted Danish political leaders and the Jewish community, giving them 72 hours of warning. The news spread like wildfire. In Copenhagen synagogues on September 29th, during Rosh Hashanah services, rabbis interrupted prayers with an urgent message. The Nazis are coming tomorrow. Hide, run, seek help. Panic turned into mobilization. The Danish resistance, until then a loose, fragmented network of patriots, unified around a single purpose: evacuate 7,800 Jews to neutral Sweden across the Øresund. On the afternoon of September 29th, 3 resistance members arrived in Gilleleje looking for Søren Hansen. They found him repairing nets on the pier. "Captain Hansen, we need your help," said the leader, a young university student named Lars. "The Nazis will arrest all the Jews the day after tomorrow. We have to get them to Sweden. We need boats." Søren kept working, hands moving automatically while his mind calculated. How many Jews? In Copenhagen and nearby, about 6,000. Some are already running to the countryside, hiding in churches and farms. But many will need to cross the strait. How many boats do you have? None yet. That's why we're here. Søren looked out across the water. Late September usually meant decent conditions, but crossing with refugees wasn't like fishing. The Germans patrol constantly. Fast boats, searchlights, they'll detect any vessel. Is there a way to avoid them? Søren thought. 47 years of memory in those waters. Maybe. If we cross at night, no lights, using the right currents. If we know exactly where the patrols are and when their shifts change. Can you do it? Søren finally stopped working. He looked directly at Lars. When do the raids begin? October 1st, the day after tomorrow. Then there's no time for elaborate planning. We'll have to improvise. Søren stood up. I know 12 captains in this harbor. I'll see who will help. And if they refuse? They won't, Søren said with absolute certainty. They're Danish fishermen. Fishermen don't let people drown. The organization. Søren spent the night of September 29th visiting every captain in Gilleleje. His argument was simple. The Nazis are coming for our Jewish neighbors. We can take them to Sweden. I need to know who's willing. 11 of the 12 said yes immediately. The 12th, Knud Petersen, hesitated. I have family to think about. If I'm caught, I understand. Søren cut in. No one will judge you. But the next morning, Knud showed up on the pier. I've been thinking, if I don't help and they're taken, I'll never forgive myself. Count me in. 12 boats. Combined capacity, roughly 300 people per trip if they packed them in. But getting 300 people across a guarded strait took more than boats. It required a system. Søren convened a meeting inside an empty fish warehouse on September 30th, the final day before the raids. Present, the 12 captains, resistance representatives, the local pastor Kjeldgaard, who offered his church as a gathering point, and Dr. Levy to coordinate medical needs. We have to solve 3 problems, Søren began. First, how to gather refugees without attracting Nazi attention. Second, how to transport them to the harbor without being seen. Third, how to cross the strait without being detected. For the first problem, they decided to use a church network. Pastor Kjeldgaard would contact priests in Copenhagen and nearby towns. Churches would become temporary safe points where Jewish families could shelter. From there, the resistance would organize transport to the coast. For the second problem, they requisitioned ambulances, delivery trucks, anything that could carry people without suspicion. Refugees traveled hidden under tarps, in secret compartments, disguised as workers. For the third problem, Søren unfolded a detailed Øresund map he had annotated for decades. German patrols follow patterns, he explained. They change shifts at midnight, 4 a.m., and 8 a.m. During those changes, there are 15 to 20-minute windows when surveillance weakens. 20 minutes? Lars objected. How do we cross in 20 minutes? We don't cross in 20 minutes. We leave port during those 20 minutes. Once we're in open water, we use routes that avoid the main patrol lines. Søren drew 3 routes on the map. Route A, straight north, 4.2 kilometers, favorable current but more patrolled. Route B, northeast angle, 6.1 kilometers, less patrolled but tricky currents. Route C, far north around the point, 8.8 kilometers, almost no patrols, but dangerous in bad weather. Which do we use? All of them. Different boats take different routes each night. If one route gets discovered, the others stay safe. And if we're intercepted? Søren looked around the room. If we're intercepted with refugees aboard, we pretend they're crew. If the Nazis don't believe us, then... He let the sentence hang. Everyone understood. The consequences meant arrest, probably execution. There's another problem, Dr. Levy said. Children. Small children cry, make noise. If a patrol is close, a single cry could betray us. There was no easy solution. Finally, the doctor offered, I have mild sedatives. We can give tiny doses to children under 5 before the trip. Only enough to keep them quiet. It was a horrific thing to consider. Drugging children to save their lives. But survival demanded brutal arithmetic. How much will we charge? One captain asked. An uneasy silence followed. Helping was moral. But fishermen had families to feed. Fuel cost money. Risk demanded compensation. We charge what they can pay, Søren decided. Rich families pay full price, 2,000 kroner per person. that subsidizes poor families who cross for free. No one is rejected for lack of money. It was pragmatic solidarity. The wealthy financed the escape of the poor. Everyone survived. By the end of the September 30th meeting, they had an operational plan. Not sophisticated. No special equipment, no military training, no unlimited resources. Just fishermen improvising with the tools they knew. Boats, sea knowledge, ordinary courage in extraordinary circumstances. The raids would begin in less than 24 hours. The first night, October 1st. At 8:43 p.m. on October 1st, the SS began arrests in Copenhagen. They kicked in doors, searched apartments, raided synagogues. They found empty homes, abandoned prayer halls. Out of 7,800 Danish Jews, they captured only 284 the first night. The other 7,500 had vanished. They were hiding in churches, farms, the homes of Gentile neighbors. All of Denmark became a national conspiracy of passive resistance. When Nazis asked about Jews, Danes answered with careful ignorance. "I don't know where they are. Maybe they moved." But hiding was temporary. The goal was permanent evacuation to Sweden. In Gilleleje, Søren received the first group of refugees at 10:15 p.m. 37 people, 3 whole families, arrived in a delivery truck. They were terrified, exhausted, some openly crying. "Welcome," Søren said calmly. "You'll be safe. We cross in 2 hours." Those 2 hours were needed to wait for the patrol shift change at midnight. While they waited, Søren organized them into groups of 25, the capacity of his boat. He explained the rules. Absolute silence during the crossing, no smoking, no lights. If a patrol is near, everyone lies flat under tarps on deck. If anyone panics, the others calm them immediately. At 12:03 a.m. on October 2nd, during the shift change window, 4 boats left the harbor of Gilleleje. Søren's Johanna Marie carried 27 refugees. The other 3 boats carried 25, 23, and 31. Total, 106 people on the first run. They sailed without lights, engines at minimum speed to reduce noise. Søren steered by stars and muscle memory forged over 47 years. Every wave, every drift of current was familiar. 20 minutes out, a German searchlight swept the water 800 meters south. Søren angled slightly north, keeping distance. The beam never came closer. 52 minutes in, they entered Swedish territorial waters. Swedish guards intercepted them with bright lights. "We're Danish fishermen," Søren shouted. "We're carrying Jewish refugees." The Swedes, whose government had instructed them to accept all Danish refugees, guided the boats into the harbor of Raal. Refugees disembarked, many sobbing with relief. A Swedish guard told Søren, "You can come back any time. Bring more." The full trip had taken 87 minutes. No incidents, no captures. A success. Søren and the 3 other captains returned immediately to Gilleleje, arriving at 3:14 a.m. A second group waited, 94 people this time, assembled by the resistance through the night. At 4:07 a.m., during the next shift change window, they left again. 4 boats, 94 refugees, the same procedure. This time, a German patrol came closer. 400 meters. The searchlight swept directly toward them. Søren ordered everyone under the tarps. The boat appeared empty, only Søren visible at the helm. The light pinned them. Søren waved casually, pretended to adjust nets. 30 seconds of scrutiny. Then the beam moved on. Under the tarps, 27 people held their breath. A 4-year-old child, lightly sedated, slept in his mother's arms. A 73-year-old woman whispered prayers. A 19-year-old squeezed his girlfriend's hand, both trembling. When it was safe, Søren murmured, "You can breathe. It's over." They reached Sweden at 5:51 a.m., 94 more safe. By dawn on October 2nd, the 12 Gilleleje boats had made 3 trips each. Total evacuated the first night, 214 people. It was only the beginning. The expansion of the operation. News of Gilleleje's success spread fast. By October 3rd, resistance representatives across Denmark were contacting Søren. Could he evacuate more? Could he help coordinate other ports? Søren understood the small operation had to scale dramatically, beyond Gilleleje to a national network of fishing ports evacuating simultaneously. On October 3rd, he convened an emergency meeting with captains from 5 additional ports: Snekkersten, Espergærde, Humlebæk, Vedbæk, Tarbæk. All were coastal towns north of Copenhagen, all with fishing fleets, all 4 to 15 kilometers from Sweden. The Nazi net is tightening, Søren warned. Every night they increase patrols. We may have a week, 2 at most, before surveillance becomes impenetrable. We have to evacuate thousands in that time. The captains understood. They agreed on coordination. Each port would run evacuations at the same time, dispersing Nazi attention. If Germans concentrated patrols at one harbor, the others kept moving. But there was a larger logistical problem: transporting thousands of refugees from Copenhagen to the coastal ports without detection. The solution came from an unexpected source: the Danish railways. Railway workers, many secretly in the resistance, began losing trains. Convoys scheduled for Copenhagen mysteriously ended up in Gilleleje. Misplaced freight cars appeared at coastal stations, full of refugees. Requisitioned ambulances carried patients who miraculously recovered upon reaching the coast. Milk trucks delivered dairy products that turned out to be families hidden among empty cans. It was national improvisation. Every Dane who knew contributed. Doctors providing sedatives, bakers supplying food for crossings, bankers liquidating Jewish assets to fund escapes, teachers hiding children in schools, police forgetting to inspect certain vehicles. Denmark became a rescue machine. By October 5th, the operation had evacuated 831 people. By October 7th, 1,547. By October 10th, 2,193. The numbers rose, and so did the danger. Furious at the massive failure of the raids, the Nazis intensified surveillance. Patrols doubled. Searchlights became constant. Fast boats began intercepting random vessels for inspection. On October 8th, Captain Anders Sørensen's boat was intercepted with 18 refugees aboard. The Nazis, finally catching the operation in the act, arrested everyone. Anders was sent to a concentration camp where he would die in 1945. It was the first major loss. Proof the risk was not theoretical, but lethal. Søren called an emergency meeting. "Do we continue?" he asked simply. The remaining 11 captains in Gilleleje answered unanimously. "We continue. But we must adapt," Søren added. "They're learning. So must we." Tactics evolve. As the Nazis adjusted their defenses, the fishermen adjusted their tactics. It became a cat-and-mouse war on black water, where one mistake meant death. Tactic 1: false positives. Søren coordinated with fishermen not involved in evacuations to create distractions. Legitimate fishing boats sailed at specific times, pulling patrol attention. While the Nazis inspected them, evacuation boats crossed via alternate routes. It was deliberate sacrifice. Fishermen endured harassment so others could move refugees. Tactic 2: Under-deck hideouts, several captains built hidden compartments beneath decks, like prohibition smugglers. If intercepted, refugees hid inside, undetectable during quick inspections. Only a full dismantling would reveal them. Tactic 3. Coastal signals resistors developed a signaling system to warn of patrol positions. Lights in certain windows meant safe routes. Darkness meant extreme danger. Tactic 4. Lunar timing. Søren observed that new moon nights offered maximum darkness. He coordinated large evacuations during those nights, exploiting natural invisibility. Tactic 5. Fake fishing runs. Captains carried real nets and used them mid-crossing. If intercepted, they claimed to be fishing legally. Refugees under tarps could pass as covered catch. Tactic 6. Cooperation with Swedish Coast Guards, officially neutral but sympathetic, began patrolling aggressively near the maritime border. Their presence discouraged Nazi pursuit in contested waters. But the most important tactic was the simplest: speed. Søren understood their window was limited. Every day the Nazis failed to make mass. Arrests was a day gained. So the fishermen pushed a brutal tempo. Multiple night runs, no rest, men steering until their bodies shook with exhaustion. The Johanna Marie typically made 3 to 4 trips per night. It left Gilleleja, crossed to Sweden, 87 minutes, unloaded, 15 minutes, returned, 83 minutes, loaded a new group, 20 minutes, repeated. Søren navigated from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. without stopping, slept briefly during the day, then did it again. Other captains matched the pace. It was physically unsustainable and morally necessary. "How long can you keep this up?" Lars asked during a visit on October 12th. "Until everyone is safe," Søren replied. "Or until they catch us." The impossible night. October 15. By mid-October, the Nazis had adapted significantly. Patrols were constant. Searchlights swept the water without pause. Fast boats performed random interceptions. The windows of opportunity had nearly closed. The resistance estimated roughly 600 Danish Jews remained in Denmark, hidden but vulnerable. If they weren't evacuated soon, they would eventually be discovered. Søren proposed an audacious plan the other captains considered suicidal: a massive, simultaneous evacuation from all ports in one night. Overwhelm the Nazis with so many crossings that it would be impossible to intercept them all. "If we all leave at once," Søren explained, "they'll have to choose which boat to chase. Most will get through." "And the ones who don't?" Captain Jensen asked. "That's the risk. But if we go slow, we'll all be caught eventually. If we go fast, most survive." It was brutal arithmetic, but mathematically sound. On October 15th, they coordinated a massive evacuation. 63 boats from 6 different ports would depart between midnight and 2 a.m. Total capacity: roughly 850 people in single runs. The remaining refugees were gathered during the day. Families hiding in church basements, barns, school attics. The resistance transported them to the coast using 40 vehicles, 120 volunteers, coordination rivaling military operations. At 11:47 p.m. on October 15th, 850 Danish Jews waited in 6 ports. It was the largest group yet, and the most extreme risk. The Nazis, alerted by unusual movement, intensified patrols. Miller personally supervised from the port of Helsingør, expecting a mass interception. At midnight sharp, the boats began to leave. 63 boats moving at once towards Sweden, spread across 40 kilometers of coastline. It looked like an invading fleet, yet it was a fleet of salvation. The Nazis responded chaotically. Patrols sprinted between intercepts. Searchlights thrashed the water. Contradictory orders flooded the radios. Søren, steering the Johanna Marie with 31 refugees aboard, saw 3 German patrols. The first passed 600 meters south, chasing another boat. The second illuminated him briefly, then moved on, overwhelmed by too many targets. The third never saw him. Other boats weren't so lucky. The Margrethe, captained by Olsen, was intercepted. Nazis boarded, found refugees, arrested everyone. It was one of 4 captures that night. But 59 boats reached Sweden successfully. Of the 850 who left that night, 782 arrived safely. Success rate, 92%. It was a massive victory and a demonstration of cost. 4 boats lost, 68 people arrested, 4 captains on their way to concentration camps. When Søren returned to Gilleleje at 2:43 a.m., Lars was waiting with news. Olsen was captured, Knudsen too, maybe 2 others. Søren felt the weight of guilt. He had proposed the plan. Those men would die or disappear into camps because they followed his strategy. Did it work? Lars asked. Yes, nearly 800 made it. Then it was worth it. Cold comfort. Victories measured in majorities saved while minorities died. Søren understood the reality of resistance. Brutal math where success meant only that more lived than died. The final days. By October 20th, the evacuation had carried more than 2,400 Danish Jews to Sweden. Roughly 200 still remained in Denmark, hidden and waiting for final chances to escape. But the window closed. Furious, the Nazis imposed extreme surveillance. Crossing wasn't just risky, it was nearly impossible. The last 200 escaped in small groups over the next 3 weeks, using increasingly desperate tactics. Some crossed in single kayaks. Others swam short distances at specific points. Several were transported in wooden crates aboard commercial boats. The last refugee Søren evacuated was Sarah Goldstein, 8 years old, daughter of the Gilleleje shopkeeper. Her parents had been arrested in the initial raids on October 1st. Sarah hid in a church attic for 6 weeks. On November 7th, Søren brought her to Sweden aboard the Johanna Marie. She was the only passenger, a small figure wrapped in blankets, crying silently for parents she would never see again. "You'll be safe," Søren told her gently. "Your parents wanted you safe." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. They arrived without incident. When Sarah stepped onto Swedish soil, she turned back towards Søren. "Thank you, Captain," she said in a tiny voice. "You're welcome, little one. Take care." Sarah Goldstein survived the war, emigrated to Israel in 1948, and lived until 2019. She had 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 14 great-grandchildren. A family line that would have ended in a gas chamber continued because a 52-year-old fisherman decided his boat could carry more than cod. By the end of November 1943, the evacuation operation was over. Out of roughly 7,800 Danish Jews, 7,220 had been evacuated to Sweden. Only 580 were captured and deported. Survival rate, 93%, a statistic without parallel in occupied Europe, where typically 70 to 90% of Jews were murdered. Consequences. The Nazis never fully understood how they lost 7,220 Jews under intensive surveillance. Müller was removed from his post in January 1944 for catastrophic failure. In his reports, he speculated about an international spy network and mass collaboration by the Danish population. But he never correctly identified the central mechanism: fishermen using ordinary sea knowledge in an extraordinary way. Søren Hansen kept fishing until 1960. he never spoke publicly about his role. When journalists sought him out after the war, he replied, "I only did what any Dane would have done. I'm not a hero, I'm just a fisherman." But the numbers told a different story. The Johanna Marie made 47 evacuation trips between October 1st and November 7th, 1943. It transported 1,127 refugees. None were captured during its crossings. Success rate, 100%. The original 12 captains of Gila Leger collectively transported 2,183 refugees. 4 were captured and sent to concentration camps. 2 died there. The 8 survivors returned to fishing after the war and rarely spoke about what they had done. In 1963, Yad Vashem honored Soren Hansen as righteous among the nations. He traveled to Israel for the ceremony, his only trip outside Denmark. Asked to give a speech, he said simply, "The sea doesn't ask about religion. A storm drowns Jews and Christians the same. We fishermen rescue whoever needs rescuing, not because of heroism, but because of basic humanity." Søren died in 1971 at the age of 80. His funeral in Gila Leger drew more than 300 people, including 47 refugees he had transported. Many traveled from Israel, the United States, and Sweden to honor the fishermen who had saved them. Sarah Goldstein, now 36, with children of her own, spoke at the funeral. "Captain Hansen told me my parents wanted me safe. I never lived to see them again, but I lived. And that life, those decades, my experiences, my family, my children, exists because a fisherman decided his boat could carry more than fish. I don't know if that's heroism, but I know it's love." The Johanna Marie, the boat that carried 1,127 lives to safety, was preserved as a monument. It now sits on display at the Maritime Museum of Denmark. Visitors can walk its deck, touch its wheel, and imagine the October nights of 1943, when that boat was the line between life and death. Analysis: why it worked. The mass evacuation of Danish Jews succeeded due to a combination of geography, timing, culture, and brilliant improvisation. Favorable geography. At its narrowest point, the Øresund is only about 4 kilometers wide. Short crossings meant minimal exposure to patrols. Compared to the Pyrenees between France and Spain, hundreds of kilometers of mountains, Denmark had a natural geographic advantage. Early warning Georg Duckwitz provided 72 hours of warning. That time allowed mass mobilization before the Nazis could begin arrests. Without the warning, thousands would have been captured before an escape could be organized. National cooperation. All of Denmark conspired. This wasn't an isolated resistance operation. It was a national mobilization. Police, doctors, railway workers, fishermen, ordinary citizens all contributed. The scale made it impossible for the Nazis to identify and arrest the conspirators. Local knowledge fishermen like Søren knew the Øresund intimately. That knowledge, accumulated over decades, was impossible for the Nazis to replicate. They understood currents, routes, and timing well enough to evade patrols. Swedish Neutrality Sweden, neutral but sympathetic, accepted every refugee without restriction. If Sweden had closed the border, the evacuation would have been pointless. Its tacit cooperation was essential. Nazi limitations. In October 1943, Germany was fighting on multiple fronts. Resources were stretched. They could not dedicate an entire army to watching the Danish coast. That overload left gaps the evacuations exploited. Operational timing. Søren understood urgency. Evacuating quickly, before the Nazis, fully adapted, was critical. 2 additional weeks of delay, would likely have allowed Germany to seal the routes. Risk dispersion, multiple ports, multiple boats, multiple routes, no single point of failure. When the Nazis captured one boat, others still moved. The system was resilient by design. Legacy. The Danish-Jewish evacuation is a unique case in Holocaust history. A genocide almost completely thwarted by civilian resistance. While in Poland, the Netherlands, and France, 70 to 90% of Jews died. In Denmark, 93% survived. That statistic forces an uncomfortable question. Why did Denmark succeed where others failed? The answers are complex: geography, timing, politics. But fundamentally, Denmark proved what becomes possible when an entire population decides it will not surrender its neighbors. Søren Hansen was not a Superman. He was a 52-year-old fisherman with a 15-meter boat. Yet that ordinary man, with ordinary tools, achieved what armies could not. He beat a Nazi killing machine. The Nazis built an industrial system of extermination. Trains, camps, gas chambers, efficient bureaucracy. Against that, Søren had sea knowledge, 12 fishing boats, and one simple moral conviction: letting people drown was unacceptable. The lesson isn't that resistance always wins. Across occupied Europe, resistance often lost. Millions died. The lesson is that resistance is possible, that ordinary people with limited means can frustrate extraordinary evil if they act together. The Øresund, the strait Søren sailed for 47 years, became a border between life and death. 4 kilometers determined who lived and who died. And a fisherman decided those 4 kilometers could be crossed. Epilogue. The waters remember. In 2013, 70 years after the evacuations, survivors and descendants held a commemoration in Gilleleje. 200 people gathered at the harbor where Søren had operated. Among them was Jacob Goldstein, 54 years old, Sarah's grandson. He had never met his grandmother, Sarah. She died before he was born. But he knew the story. An 8-year-old girl carried by a fisherman across black water. "I'm here," Jacob said during the ceremony, "because Captain Hansen decided to help. My children are here because he helped. My future grandchildren will exist because he helped. One decision, one boat, one October night, and it creates consequences." Descendants of the original 12 captains also attended. Many had become fishermen themselves, continuing family tradition. They worked the same boats, sailed the same waters. "My grandfather never spoke about what he did," explained Lars Hansen, Søren's grandson. "But when I was 12, he took me to sea for the first time. He showed me the route to Sweden. He told me, the sea can separate, but it can also unite. Always remember your boat isn't only for fishing, it's for whatever it needs to be." That afternoon, a replica of the Johanna Marie sailed from Gilleleje to Sweden with survivors and descendants aboard. The trip took 89 minutes, 2 minutes longer than Søren's average in 1943. When they reached the Swedish harbor of Raå, a Swedish Coast Guard saluted them just as his predecessors had saluted 70 years earlier. "Welcome to Sweden. You're safe." The words echoed across decades, a reminder that safety sometimes depends on intimate local knowledge, the courage of ordinary fishermen, and a collective decision that no human being is disposable. The Øresund remains. 4 kilometers of water between Denmark and Sweden, crossed daily by ferries, commercial ships, and pleasure yachts. Tourists cross in 20 minutes without thinking, unaware those waters were once the boundary between genocide and salvation. But the waters remember, and the descendants of the 2,400 people who crossed in October 1943 remember. And the Johanna Marie in its museum remembers. The Nazis could not understand how 2,400 people escaped in a single night across the river because they underestimated three things: the local knowledge of those who live their entire lives in one place, the willingness of ordinary people to risk everything for their neighbors, and the fact that the sea, indifferent to politics and hatred, will carry anyone if there is a captain willing to steer. Søren Hansen, fisherman of Gilleleje, captain of the Johanna Marie, saver of 1,127 lives, was right in his modesty. He was not a hero in the traditional sense. He didn't fight epic battles. He didn't give stirring speeches. He didn't perform impossible feats. He simply sailed his boat 47 times, through waters he knew as well as his own breathing, carrying people who needed to be carried. And in the simplicity of that repeated act lies something deeper than heroism. Ordinary humanity refusing to accept extraordinary inhumanity. And that, at the end, was enough to defeat the Nazis in Danish waters. 4 kilometers of sea, a 15-meter boat, a 52-year-old fisherman. Enough to save 2,400 lives. Enough to prove that evil, no matter how organized, can be beaten by good that is determined enough. Enough to show that the waters that separate can also unite, when there are captains willing to sail toward the storm instead of away from it. The Øresund remains, a silent witness to October nights when it became a passage into life. And in its waters, if you know how to listen, you can still hear the echo of fishing boat engines carrying hope through the darkness, guided by stars and the courage of fishermen who decided their job wasn't only to catch fish, but to save souls. The Nazis searched, the Nazis patrolled, the Nazis failed, because the sea belongs to those who know it. And in October 1943, the Øresund belonged to Denmark, and Denmark used it to save its children.